Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum dear students. In our today's session again we would continue the novel Emma that is written by Jane Austen. Today we would continue with volume 2 of the novel Emma. Before I proceed forward, I would like to share a quick review of the previous session. Well, in the previous session we started volume 2 of the novel Emma and scheme of presentation was introduced to you. I told you that there are different versions available in the market. Some have the division in volumes, some do not have. So I told you how we would forward. I told you that I would follow a scheme that has volumes in it. However, to facilitate the understanding of all those students who have the versions of the text that are with volumes or without volumes, what I would do is that I would follow a continuous numbering of the chapters. This implies that chapter 1 of volume 2 that we did in the previous session was numbered as chapter 19, that was the total numbering. So this is how we covered in the previous session from chapter 19 to chapter 28. Well, as far as the scheme of understanding was concerned, we looked at the chapters with reference to important parts of the text, how the important happenings and events related to important themes in the text. Important critical points of analysis were also brought into discussion, and we talked about the writing style of Jane Austen as well. As far as today's session is concerned, it will be a continuation of volume 2 of the novel Emma. In other words, we would cover from chapter 29 to chapter 36 in today's session. And for going through these chapters, we would follow the same scheme of analysis, which implies we would be looking at the happenings and events taking place in these chapters, how they are related to the development of certain characters, the development of certain themes, and how the writing style of the author, that is Jane Austen, is reflected in the presentation of all the events and happenings. So, to start with the part of the text that we would cover in today's session, I would start with chapter 29, and this is volume 2. Let's see what happens in this chapter. As Frank Churchill enjoyed dancing at the party organized by Coles very much, now he plans another one for Highbury. Although initially planned for Randalls, the lack of acceptable space for dancing leads him to plan it instead for the Crown Inn. And now that the party is going to be arranged there at Crown Inn, while the Woodhouses are visiting Randalls, Frank and Emma work on planning this party so that they can finish the dancing inaugurated at the previous party. They decide the room at Randalls is too small, and this lack of acceptable space for dancing leads them to actually plan it instead for the Crown Inn. Meanwhile, Mr. Woodhouse is very much irritated by the immature and thoughtless ways of Frank. He shares with Mrs. Weston his concern that Frank is so thoughtless about opening and shutting doors that he exposes Emma, Harriet and Mrs. Weston to the drafts of cold air that could cause ill health for any of them. Though Frank does a poor job of reassuring Mr. Woodhouse that this plan will not give them all colds, Emma comforts her father and she agrees to the plan. Meanwhile, Frank goes to fetch Miss Bates along with her niece to help set out the difficulties in arrangements. However, by the time he returns, the difficulties have been resolved. The date of the ball has been set. Frank also takes a promise from Emma that at the party she will dance the first 2 dances with him. Well, important discussion points related to chapter 29 are as follows. This chapter demonstrates the planning that goes into the various social events that occur throughout Austen's novels. we come to know what occupies most of the time of the elites in Highbury, such as Emma and the Westons, and what kind of activities they are involved in. If we think about this question, we would come to know it is always picnics, parties, balls, visiting friends and the acquaintances. This is all the time what they are involved in. Nothing more meaningful than as such we would find them involved in. And when we look at the kind of activity that they are involved in, the nature of the activity itself, what we notice is the arrangements are detailed and elaborate. Everyone's tastes and opinions are catered for. The issues such as who to invite and why are of crucial importance. Whether the location would suit all or not is also important for the organizers. Minute details of how comfortable each person will be are all considered. Again, what I would like to say with reference to the organization that is, or arrangement that is detailed and very elaborate for these parties and for this upcoming party as well, is I would like to point out, my dear students, that for the elite class to which Emma belongs to which Mrs. Weston also belongs to, this is the class that women there do not have anything else to do, and most of the time that they spend is in socializing, in meeting people of their class, in being parties, in enjoying themselves, and the time that they have is all devoted to either leisure or entertainment. In the case of this novel, it is very interesting that we do not even find men doing anything. It is 18th century England where the elite class men are the owners of lands and estates. Now, being the owners of lands and being the owners of big estates, they are not supposed to do any work. They are not related to any profession as such. So what we would see is that again they are involved in all such activities such as parties and balls, and they consider them very, very important. Another important thing with reference to chapter 29 that I would like to point out is with reference to the character of Frank Churchill. Well, when we notice the character of Frank Churchill, we come across the following. Number one, Frank Churchill differs from the other men of Highbury. Number two, his major concern is enjoyment and pleasure. Even he arranges the party for the same reason. For him, socialization or propriety or manners are not of that importance as are these for other people. He has no profession like Mr. Elton, and he doesn't behave with the authority that Mr. Knightley or Mr. Weston show. In fact, Austen, the writer, shows this through the contrast between what Emma focuses on while planning the party, and while Emma wants to please everybody, Frank is more interested in enjoyment, and he is more interested in ensuring that there is enough room to dance. With this, we come to chapter 30. Emma is worried that Frank's aunt, Mrs. Churchill, will refuse Frank permission to stay on for the ball, which is scheduled for a few days after his visit is scheduled to end. However, everybody is happy that he gets the permission. It is only Mr. Knightley who is not very much interested in the party. He even doesn't seem interested in dancing. Emma takes Knightley's disinterest as further proof that he is not interested in Jane, who in a rare moment of openness confesses how much she looks forward to the ball. Again, what we notice is that Emma's imagination is at work, and it is only on the basis of her imagination that she keeps on taking decisions, and she keeps on making matches and thinking about the relationships. It is only on the basis of what Jane said that she is looking forward to the party that she thought that Jane is interested in Knightley, whereas Knightley's disinterest is deduced from the simple thing that he is not interested in the ball itself. Anyhow, 2 days later, a letter arrives from Mr. Churchill to urge his nephew's instant return due to Mrs. Churchill's sudden illness. Because of this unfortunate happening, the ball is postponed indefinitely and Frank comes to Emma to say goodbye. Now, because the party is cancelled and he is a person who is more interested in enjoyment, he is clearly dejected at this and he is very unhappy at this sudden departure. As he speaks to Emma, we feel that he is going to declare something serious. However, interrupted by his father, Frank departs without saying anything as such. Emma is also very much depressed as he leaves. When Frank leaves, Emma is certain that he almost tells her that he loved her. She convinces herself that she too is in love with him. In order to understand how Emma behaves when Frank comes and how Frank behaves when he begs leave, let's read some relevant part of the text from this chapter, that is chapter 30. So the text is a part where Frank comes to take leave as he has to go because of the illness of his aunt. The text goes as follows. Emma was ready for her visitor some time before he appeared, but if this reflected at all upon his impatience, his sorrowful look and total want of spirits when he did come might redeem him. He felt the going away almost too much to speak of it. His dejection was most evident. He sat rarely lost in thought for the first few minutes, and when rousing himself it was only to say, "Of all horrid things, leave-taking is the worst." "But you will come again," said Emma. "This will not be your only visit to Randall's." "Ah," shaking his head, "the uncertainty of when I may be able to return. I shall try for it with a zeal. It will be the object of all my thoughts and cares. And if my uncle and aunt go to this town this spring, but I'm afraid they did not stir last spring, I'm afraid it is a custom gone forever. Our poor ball must be quite given up. Ah, that ball! Why did we wait for anything? Why not seize the pleasure at once? How often is happiness destroyed by preparation, foolish preparation? You told us it would be so. Oh, Miss Woodhouse, why are you always so right? Indeed, I am very sorry to be right in this instance. I would much rather have been merry than wise. If I can come again, we are still to have our ball. My father depends on it. Do not forget your engagement." Emma looked graciously. "Such a fortnight as it has been," he continued. "Every day more precious and more delightful than the day before. Every day making me less fit to bear any other place. Happy those who can remain at Highbury." So what we notice is that Frank is very much dejected at leaving, at his departure. On the other hand, he is full of praises for Highbury. He longs to stay here at Highbury, though he has to leave. The text continues. "As you do us such ample justice now," said Emma, laughing, "I will venture to ask whether you didn't come a little doubtfully at first. Do not we rather surpass your expectations?" "I am sure we do. I am sure you did not much expect to like us. You would not have been so long in coming if you had had a pleasant idea of Highbury." So you see, now when that Frank praises Highbury and the people here, Emma reminds him that he didn't come for quite long a time, and actually she points out that maybe he was not expecting them to be that good. He laughed rather consciously, and though denying the sentiment, Emma was convinced that it had been so. "And you must be off this very morning." "Yes, my father is to join me here. We shall walk back together, and I must be off immediately. I'm almost afraid that every moment will bring him. Not 5 minutes to spare even for your friends, Miss Fairfax and Miss Bates?" How lucky! Miss Bates' powerful argumentative mind might have strengthened yours. "Yes, I have called there, passing the door, and I thought it better. It was the right thing to do. I went in for 3 minutes and was detained by Miss Bates's being absent. She was out, and I felt it impossible not to wait till she came in. She is a woman that one must laugh at, but that one would not wish to slight. It was better to pay my visit then." He hesitated, got up, walked to a window. "In short," said he, "perhaps, Miss Woodhouse, I think you can hardly be quite without suspicion." He looked at her as if wanting to read her thoughts. She hardly knew what to say. So we can notice confusion, we can notice chaos on both the sides. We can also notice that maybe Frank wants to say something, but he is a bit reluctant in saying that. Anyhow, the text continues again. It seemed like the forerunner of something absolutely serious which she did not wish. Forcing herself to speak, therefore, in the hope of putting it by, she calmly said, "You are quite in the right. It was most natural to pay you a visit then." He was silent. She believed he was looking at her, probably reflecting on what she had said and trying to understand the manner. She heard him sigh. It was natural for him to feel that he had cause to sigh. He couldn't believe her to be encouraging him. A few awkward moments passed, and he sat down again, and in a more determined manner said, "It was something to feel that all the rest of my time might be given to Harfield. My regard to Harfield is most warm." He stopped again, rose again, and seemed quite embarrassed. So what we can notice is that he wants to say something, he's unable to say that, and he's very much reluctant. That is why the narrator writes, he was more in love with her than Emma had supposed, and who can say how it might have ended if his father had not made his appearance. Mr. Woodhouse soon followed, and the necessity of exertion made him composed. So it was because of the interruption that he couldn't say. He couldn't say what he wanted to say. A few minutes more, however, completed the present trial. Mr. Weston, always alert when business was to be done, and as incapable of procrastinating any evil that was inevitable as of foreseeing any that was doubtful, said, "It was time to go," and the young man, though he might and did sigh, couldn't but agree to take leave. "I shall hear about you all," said he. "This is my chief consolation. I shall hear of everything that is going on among you. I have engaged Mrs. Weston to correspond with me. She has been so kind as to promise it. Oh, the blessing of a female correspondent when one is really interested in the absent. She will tell me everything. In her letters I shall be at dear Highbury again." A very friendly shake of the hand, a very earnest goodbye closed the speech, and the door had soon shut out Frank Churchill. So he could not express what he wanted to express, but just praising Highbury and the people around and telling that anyhow he would be in contact as Mrs. Weston would be corresponding with him. This is the time for him to leave. And what we are told by the narrator of the whole novel is a very friendly shake of a hand, a very earnest goodbye. This closed the speech, and finally Frank Churchill was gone. The door was shut. Short had been the notice, short their meeting. He was gone, and Emma felt so sorry to part, and foresaw so great a loss to their little society from his absence as to begin to be afraid of being too sorry and feeling it too much. Well, before I come to other discussion points in relation to this chapter, that is chapter 30, I would like to talk with reference to this visit of Frank to Emma to say goodbye. We have noticed a lot of confusion and chaos. We notice on Emma's part that she's expecting Frank to say something. We notice reluctance on Frank's part. He wants to say something definitely, but he's unable to say that. And then because he has to finally part, he has to leave, so a very warm goodbye he says, and he leaves. We also need to notice when we go to this part of the text where it is said that Emma felt so sorry to part and foresaw so great a loss to their little society from his absence. Yes, what we need to notice is that this is a real little society, a small town with few families, only few elite families that would interact and would be meeting each other. So in that society, absence of anybody would really matter. And in this case, Frank, who is very lively when he leaves, Emma really feels sorry. There are some other important points with reference to this chapter that are important and that need to be discussed. The most important thing that emerges is the theme of love, romance, and marriage. We need to notice the theme of love. Interestingly, Emma finds herself believing that Frank might love her. She also convinces herself that she might be in love with him. What we need to consider is that in the light of Emma's previous thoughts regarding love, romance, and marriage, this is very, very strange. Emma previously thought of romance only in practical terms, now finds herself considering actual love. However, she has no concrete idea what love actually entails. She lists as examples of her love listlessness, weariness, and stupidity, indicating a passing fancy or crush and not substantial emotion. In fact, her uncertainty whether or not she is in love is a good indication in itself that maybe she is not. Well, when we look overall at these chapters, Emma's uncertainty is quite significant. Emma's thoughts about Frank reveal to us that she is lying to herself about loving him. The reality is that she only enjoys the attention Frank's courtship brings to her. She enjoys dancing with him not for the sake of dance, or she feels sharing some intimacy with him rather because everyone else admires what a fine couple they are. She misses his company as he is very lively and brings life to the surroundings, but it does not mean that she loves him. At the end of the chapter 30, Emma tries to convince herself that she loves Frank. I must be in love. I should be the oddest creature in the world if I were not, for a few weeks at least. Shows us that Emma does not yet truly understand what love feels like. Anyhow, this leads us to chapter 31 of volume 2. Let's see what happens in this chapter. Emma thinks about herself and Frank, but the thoughts about the course that her and Frank's love affair will take leads her to always think that she will end up refusing Frank. Yes, she believes she loves him, but not so much that her happiness depends upon him. And she is sure about nothing. She reads his first letter to Mrs. Weston after returning to Enscombe and admires the genuineness of the warm feelings Frank expresses for Highbury. His brief mention of Harriet makes Emma speculate that Harriet could replace her in his affections, but she reaffirms her resolution to cease matchmaking. So what we notice is that though consciously she tries to stop matchmaking, but unconsciously she still keeps on doing that. There is gossip around the town that Mr. Elton will soon arrive in Highbury with his new bride. Harriet is frustrated at this news. Emma suggests that if Harriet will not forget Elton for her own sake, she should do so for Emma's sake. For Harriet's persistent attachment is a reminder of Emma's guilt. Now when she says all this, of course, Harriet apologizes for being ungrateful and she's sorry for that. Emma is moved by the warmth of Harriet's love for her. Emma concludes that tenderness of heart which Harriet possesses and which Emma believes she herself lacks is tremendously valuable. Well, here is some opening text of chapter 31 that gives us further insights into the thought and psychology of Emma and Harriet. Emma continued to entertain no doubt of her being in love. Her ideas only varied as to the how much. At first she thought it was a good deal, and afterwards but little. She had great pleasure in hearing Frank Churchill talked of, and for his sake greater pleasure than ever in seeing Mr. and Mrs. Weston. She was very often thinking of him and quite impatient for a letter that she might know how he was, how were his spirits, how was his aunt, and what was the chance of his coming to Randalls again this spring. But on the other hand, she could not admit herself to be unhappy, nor after the first morning to be less disposed from employment than usual. She was still busy and cheerful and pleasing as he was. She could yet imagine him to have faults. And farther, though thinking of him so much, and as she sat drawing or working, forming 1,000 amusing schemes for the progress and close of their attachment, fancying interesting dialogues and inventing elegant letters, the conclusion of every imaginary declaration on his side was that she refused him. So you see, Emma thinks about Frank. The more she thinks about Frank, the more she is doubtful about her love for Frank. Initially she thought she loved him a good deal, a lot. But later on she felt it was just little. Initially she was interested in getting some news from him, receiving a letter saying how he was, what he was doing, when would he come again, etc. But at the same time she had the realization that she was not unhappy because of his absence as such. Even in her imagination, and we know Emma very well that she imagines a lot. So in her imagination, whensoever she thinks of any situation in which Frank would be declaring his love for her, she imagined herself refusing. This is quite significant about Emma. Their affection was always to subside into friendship. Everything tender and charming was to mark their parting, but still they were to part. When she became sensible of this, it struck her that she could not be very much in love, for in spite of her previous and fixed determination never to quit her father, never to marry, a strong attachment certainly must produce more of a struggle than she could foresee in her own feelings. So what we notice about her is confusion and chaos about her relationship with Frank. Anyhow, the text continues. "I don't find myself making any use of the word sacrifice," said she. "In not one of all my clever replies, my delicate negatives, is there any allusion to making a sacrifice? I do suspect that he is not really necessary to my happiness. So much the better. I certainly will not persuade myself to feel more than I do. I am quite enough in love. I should be sorry to be more." Upon the whole, she was equally contented with her view of his feelings. He is undoubtedly very much in love. Everything denotes it. Very much in love indeed. And when he comes again, if his affection continue, I must be on my guard not to encourage it. It would be most inexcusable to do otherwise, as my own mind is quite made up. Not that I imagine he can think I have been encouraging him hitherto. No, if he had believed me at all to share his feelings, he would not have been so wretched. Could he have thought himself encouraged, his looks and language at parting would have been different. Still, however, I must be on my guard. This is in the supposition of his attachment continuing what it now is, but I do not know that I expect it will. I do not look upon him to be quite the sort of man. I do not altogether build upon his steadiness or constancy. His feelings are warm, but I can imagine them rather changeable. Every consideration of the subject, in short, makes me thankful that my happiness is not more deeply involved. I shall do very well again after a little while, and then it will be a good thing over. For they say everybody is in love once in their lives, and I shall have been let off easily. So finally what we notice through this text is that Emma is now sure that she is not in love with Frank, and she decides that she would not encourage him. Even if he comes back and he professes his love, then whatsoever he believes in or whatsoever he says, Emma anyhow would never ever, she thinks, encourage him. There are some important discussion points with relation to chapter 31, which include the following. Number 1, now Emma realizes that she does not truly love Frank. Well, this shows the development of her character. Instead of following her imagination, now she is using reason to look at things. This reasoning was hitherto uncharacteristic of Emma. We have always seen her using her imagination and planning on the basis of that imagination. Now the situation is different. However, although she does not love Frank Churchill, she still enjoys his attention. It bolsters her own very high self-regard to know that a man such as Frank is so attentive to her. Still, she needs a lot to learn. Emma continues to make the same errors that caused her so much stress previously. She has not learned the lesson from the matchmaking of Harriet and Elton, Now again she is cherishing the idea of making a match between Frank Churchill and Harriet. Here is some more part of the text from chapter 31 that is about Harriet. Let's see what happens. Poor Harriet was in a flutter of spirits which required all the reasonings and soothings and attentions of every kind that Emma could give. Emma felt that she could not do too much for her, that Harriet had a right to all her ingenuity and all her patience, but it was heavy work to be forever convincing without producing any effect, forever agreed to without being able to make their opinions the same. Harriet listened submissively and said it was very true. It was just as Miss Woodhouse described. It was not worthwhile to think about them, and she would not think about them any longer. But no change of subject could avail, and the next half hour saw her as anxious and restless about the Eltons as before. Now what we notice is that Harriet is so much under the influence of Emma that she cannot refute, or she cannot refuse, or she cannot challenge anything that Emma says. She would submissively agree to whatsoever Emma would say. Whatsoever would be Emma's opinion, Harriet would not have the courage to disagree with that. That is why she would keep on saying, it was very true, yes, you are right, yes, it is just as you describe, Miss Woodhouse, etc., when Emma would pass negative comments about Eltons. However, it was beyond Harriet's control. She still could not do so, that she could not distract herself from thinking about Eltons. At last Emma attacked her on another ground. You are allowing yourself to be so occupied and so unhappy about Mr. Elton's marrying Harriet is the strongest reproach you can make me. You could not give me a greater reproof for the mistake I fell into. It was all my doing, I know. I have not forgotten it. I assure you, deceived myself. I did very miserably deceive you, and it will be a painful reflection to me forever. Do not imagine me in danger of forgetting it. अब जब Harriet Elton को नहीं भूल पा रही है, what Emma does is that she plays another trick. Now she looks at the things from another perspective, and she says that okay, by recalling and by talking again and again about Mr. Elton and by being miserable with Mr. Elton's marriage, actually what Harriet you are doing to me is that you are making me remind me of my mistake, that I tried to make you a match with Elton. So in taking this blame, Emma is actually very tactfully pressurizing Harriet to forget Mr. Elton. The text continues. Harriet felt this too much to utter more than a few words of eager exclamation. Emma continued, I have not said, exert yourself, Harriet, for my sake. Think less, talk less of Mr. Elton for my sake. Because for your own sake rather I would wish it to be done, for the sake of what is more important than my comfort, a habit of self-command in you and a consideration of what is your duty, an attention to propriety, an endeavor to avoid the suspicions of others, to save your health and credit and restore your tranquility. So Emma gives a long lecture to Harriet to not think about Elton and his marriage, and she says that don't think of it for my sake, and even for your own sake don't think of it, so that you could have a better, a more comfortable and more self-controlled and more self-commanding situation, saving yourself and restoring your tranquility and peace. These are all the motives which I have been pressing on you. They are very important, and sorry I am that you can not feel them sufficiently to act upon them. My being saved from pain is a very secondary consideration. I want you to save yourself from greater pain. Now the question arises, अब जब Emma उससे कहती है कि don't think about Elton, if you think about him, I want you not to do so, not for my sake that it makes me feel guilty, but also more importantly for your sake. Well, we really appreciate Emma for her concern and for her consideration and for her genuine love for Harriet. Perhaps I may sometimes have felt that Harriet would not forget what was due, or rather what would be kind by me. This appeal to her affections did more than all the rest. The idea of wanting gratitude and consideration from Miss Woodhouse, whom she really loved extremely, made her wretched for a while, and when the violence of grief was comforted away, still remained powerful enough to prompt to what was right and support her in it very tolerably. Support her in it very tolerably. Sorry. You have been the best friend I have ever had in my life. Want gratitude to you. Nobody is equal to you. I care for nobody as I do for you. Oh, Miss Woodhouse, how ungrateful I have been. Such expressions, assisted as they were by everything that look and manner could do, made Emma feel that she had never loved Harriet so well, nor valued her affection so highly before. So two things we learn from this text. One, that Harriet is ready to forget and to leave everything for Emma's sake. She is so very much grateful to Emma, and she loves her so much that she can do anything on her command. The second thing that we notice is that this affection, this love, and this concern that Harriet have for Emma, in response to this, what Emma feels is that she had never ever been able to understand Harriet's true love, and she had never ever been able to value her affection so highly before. Now when Harriet left, this is a part of the text that continues where Emma talks to herself. There is no charm equal to tenderness of heart, said she afterwards to herself. There is nothing to be compared to it. Warmth and tenderness of heart with an affectionate, open manner will beat all the clearness of head in the world for attraction. I am sure it will. It is tenderness of heart which makes my dear father so generally beloved, which gives Isabella all her popularity. I have it not, but I know how to prize and respect it. Harriet is my superior in all the charm and all the felicity it gives. Dear Harriet, I would not change you for the clearest-headed, longest-sighted, best-judging female breathing. Oh, the coldness of a Jane Fairfax! Harriet is worth 100 such, and for a wife, a sensible man's wife, it is invaluable. I mention no names, but happy the man who changes Emma for Harriet. And this is the very end of the chapter. So what we notice is, again, Emma is going through a process of self-development, a process of self-realization, a process of disillusionment is taking place. She realizes that the innocence, the sweetheartedness, and the tender-heartedness of Harriet is of great value. And she also realizes that it is because of this warmth and tenderness of heart that Harriet, Isabella, her own father, and other people around her are so very generally beloved. She also has a realization that she does not have that, but she is conscious that she prizes it and she respects it. Anyhow, at this moment of time, clear-headedness, far-sightedness, etc. are far less valuable qualities as she looks at Harriet and she realizes her tenderness or softness of heart. This leads us to chapter 32 of this volume. Mr. Elton returns with his bride, and Emma decides that she and Harriet should visit the newlyweds early on in order to re-establish normal social relations. Again, when we critically look at this development, we can notice that again for Emma, propriety and manners are far more important. Emma first sees the new Mrs. Elton at church, but she cannot be in the vicinity of the Eltons without recollecting Mr. Elton's bad behavior and Emma's meddling. Emma finds that Mrs. Elton has no elegance and maintains that Harriet would have been a better wife for Mr. Elton because of her higher social connections. When Emma meets with Mrs. Elton, she compares Hartfield to Maple Grove, where her brother resides, and is quite presumptuous, calling Mrs. Weston surprisingly ladylike considering her former occupation. So again, what we notice about Mrs. Elton is that number one, Emma does not like her. She doesn't find her elegant. and in comparison to Harriet, she is not a very suitable match, she thinks. The second thing that we find is that Mrs. Elton is a woman who would make loud claims. She all the time kept on comparing Harfield with Maple Grove, where her brother, who she claims is very wealthy, lives. She even calls Mr. Knightley the much less formal Knightley. Mrs. Elton is attached to superficial tokens of wealth. She presumes to take Emma under her social wing, and she prides herself on the inner resources of self-worth and foresight that she clearly lacks. Now she, you see, keeps on making claims about her foresight and about her resources and about her self-worth, whereas Emma believes she doesn't have any of those. And I think we as readers also agree with Emma that Mrs. Elton is clearly lacking all this. Mr. Woodhouse, never particularly discerning, considers the new bride pleasant enough and expresses guilt that he has not visited her. He cannot understand Emma's consternation when he suggests that a bride, you know, my dear, is always the first in company, and that a bride receives the utmost in politeness and good manners. Actually, it becomes ironic in that situation as well. On the basis of chapter 32, some important discussion points that I would like to raise are as follows. Mr. Elton has found a wife who is equally social class conscious as he is. Augusta Hawkins, that is the name of the new Miss Elton, she considers herself superior and treats the member of Highbury society with much less respect than normally accorded. The woman does not have any talent. She is self-important, ignorant and ill-bred. This is what we are told by the narrator. Her snobbery and comparisons of Harfield to Maple Grove are made worse by the fact that her connections in Maple Grove are wealthy but lower class. Again, the theme of social class status and true and genuine elite class, these ideas come in here. Social class determines proper manners in those times of England. But what we notice is that Mrs. Elton does not know how she has to behave, what her proper rank is in the society, and how she is supposed to observe manners. For example, use of surname, last name and propriety, this is something very much linked up in this society. In Jane Austen's times, people would be, in order to give them respect and to show propriety and manners, people would be called with their surnames. We even notice this happening throughout the novel, but Mrs. Elton does not know and does not follow manners in this regard as well. On the other hand, we see that even Emma and her father speak of their close friends such as Mr. Knightley as Mr. Knightley, despite their long acquaintance and equal social status. Instead of calling him George, they call him Mr. Knightley. Assuming that the character names reflect Emma's point of view, there are only a few times when a less formal name is used throughout the novel. Well, dear students, this leads us to chapter 33 of this volume. Emma continues to dislike Mrs. Elton, who, noting Emma's reserve, is offended and becomes cold and distant to her. Emma thinks that Mr. Elton has told his wife something of the unfortunate episode with her and Harriet, to whom the Eltons are specially rude. Mrs. Elton takes on Jane Fairfax as her project, attempting to bring her out socially. Well, Emma is puzzled that Jane refuses another invitation to join Mr. and Mrs. Campbell and Mr. and Mrs. Dixon in Ireland. She is also puzzled that Jane accepts Mrs. Elton's attentions, and she discusses Jane's actions with Mrs. Weston and Mr. Knightley. Mr. Knightley defends Jane's acceptance of Mrs. Elton's attentions, and Emma takes the opportunity to probe Mr. Knightley on his feelings for Jane. अब एमा का ये मसला है कि वो रह ही नहीं सकती बजाय इसके कि वो दूसरों के मामलों में दखल ना दे. शी ऑलवेज डज दैट एंड शी वुड ऑल द टाइम बी मैच मेकिंग. हर वक्त मैच मेकिंग करती रहती है, उनके रिश्ते आपस में सोचती रहती है और तय करती रहती है. So again, she's thinking about Knightley and Jane. Knightley is unhappy and uneasy about the idea that Emma has been playing matchmaker for him. However, she assures him that she has not. He also in return asserts that he is not in love with Jane. Interestingly, Emma is very happy and satisfied to know this. अब ये बात भी हमारे लिए गौर करने की है. Why she is happy that Mr. Knightley is not interested in Jane? Does it give clues that she herself is interested in Mr. Knightley? Anyhow, Mrs. Weston wonders if his eagerness in denying it indicates that actually he is in love with Jane. So Mrs. Weston thinks that Mr. Knightley is in love with Jane. Emma thinks he is not. And as a matter of fact, Emma is happy to see that he is not. Some important discussion points with chapter 33 concerning change in Emma are following. We see a lot of change in Emma. We see the following: less use of imagination, more rational, less interested in matchmaking though still interested. Her idea of marriage changes. She considers love as a fact. She can see her many flaws. Well, as a matter of fact, when we look at the personality of Emma, these changes are very significant and these are all positive. So far, she has always been deciding everything on the basis of her imagination. Now she is looking at things with a more logical eye. She is trying to be more rational. Also, every time she reminds herself that she would not make any matches of couples anymore. Though she claims that she is not interested or she is less interested, well, she actually is interested. However, the degree of this interest has decreased. As far as her idea of marriage is concerned, we also notice the change that so far she always thought of marriage source or a tool or a means to improve person's status. Now, love is a factor that she considers as a part of this institution. She can see her flaws, she can notice her flaws, and I think knowing one's flaws is the first step for that person to make up for those flaws. But she is still uncertain about love. She still cannot determine her relationship with Mr. Knightley, and she still has misunderstandings. So it will go a long way for her to learn all these lessons. This leads us to chapter 34 of this volume. In this chapter, what happens? Let's see. Emma decides to have a party for the Eltons at Halffield to hide her contempt for the couple. This is more like fulfilling a social obligation. Again, it is very important for us to notice that for Emma, propriety or manners are more important. No matter how much she dislikes Elton, no matter how much she dislikes Mrs. Elton, she still thinks in terms of etiquettes and proper manners, and her proper manners and etiquettes demand that she arranges a party for the Eltons. So this is what she does. Emma plans a dinner party, and apart from the Eltons, she invites Mr. Knightley, the Westons and Jane Fairfax. Harriet asks to be excused from attending, which gives Emma the opportunity to ease her conscience regarding Jane Fairfax, who at Harriet's announced absence is promptly invited. During the party, they discuss Jane's trip to the post office and her handwriting. Actually, Mr. John Knightley gently reproaches Jane for fetching letters from the post office that morning in the rain. Jane acts as if the situation is not a big deal, but ends up blushing and watery-eyed. Mr. Knightley praises Emma's writing, but at the same time he also makes degrading comments about Frank Churchill's handwriting, which of course is not liked by Emma. Important discussion points with reference to chapter 33 are related to the theme of propriety and manners, good nature of Emma, theme of dislike and jealousy, and finally the theme of secrecy. And we would discuss each of these one by one. As far as the theme of propriety and manners is concerned, Although it is obvious to all that Emma dislikes Mrs. Elton, as I have already mentioned, she is forced to invite the Eltons to dinner at Harfield for reasons of propriety. There may be subtle signs and indications of animosity between the two women, but Emma cannot allow such a public statement of dislike. She doesn't want people to see it. It is against manners. So propriety is more important than genuine feelings. This is what we notice as readers. As far as the good nature of Emma is concerned, the following points are noted. As Mr. Knightley earlier criticized how others have snubbed Jane Fairfax, Emma makes an effort to rectify the situation and she invites Jane Fairfax to dinner. Her invitation to Jane, unlike inviting Mrs. Elton, is genuine and sincere. She invites Jane Fairfax as a way to right her early wrongs because she thinks she didn't behave well. The question arises, however, whether it is also an attempt to unfold the mystery of Jane and Mr. Dixon, or it is her genuineness or her true goodness towards Jane. She still suspects, she still is curious that Jane is somehow involved with Mr. Dixon. However, she does not have found any proof. So there is a possibility that it is out of her good nature that she has invited Jane Fairfax. However, there are some doubts as readers that we have that maybe it is out of curiosity that she wants to dig out what kind of relationship Jane and Mr. Dixon have. Another important theme that emerges is that of dislike and jealousy. Mr. Knightley's dislike of Frank Churchill is very much evident now. He even criticizes his writing. We do not see any apparent reason for this dislike and this jealousy. As readers, if we are keen, what we can only guess is that maybe it is because of Frank Churchill's interest in Emma that Mr. Knightley feels jealous. The last theme that I would like to discuss with reference to this chapter is the theme of secrecy. The blushing face of Jane shows that she is hiding something important, some important information that she does not disclose. What that entails will soon be more clear to Emma. However, at this time point, neither we know nor Emma knows what it is all about. Well, this takes us to chapter 35, and what happens in chapter 35 is that the dinner is over. Women gather in the drawing room after dinner. Mrs. Elton still follows the subject of letter retrieval with Jane. Jane mentions that she must become a governess, which she compares to the slave trade. Mrs. Weston insists on helping Jane find a governess position. But Jane explains that she will not seek a position or a place until after she sees the Campbells. This is the time point when the men come in. Now Mr. Weston also arrives there after a day of business in London and gives Mrs. Weston a letter from Frank Churchill, who is returning to Highbury since his aunt's health has improved. Mr. and Mrs. Weston are pleased at this news, of course, but Emma is very much irritated. As far as Mr. Knightley is concerned, he seems unexcited by the news. It is the theme of social class and profession that emerges out of chapter 35. Jane Fairfax is not from a wealthy family, so her fate as a governess seems evident. Social class and profession have always been linked up throughout the novel. This is what we have seen. It is only the elite class, people who would not adopt any profession, people who are the owners of estates, such as Mr. Woodhouse, such as Mr. Knightley. Other people have to have a profession. Well, as far as Jane Fairfax is concerned, she is raised by a rich family, but she herself is not wealthy. So she must go into a profession as a governess. This shows the social setup of the times of Emma and the social setup of the times of the author Jane Austen. We remember her comparisons to Emma, but her fate is different. Well, she is intelligent like Emma, she is beautiful like Emma, she is confident like Emma, but her fate is different for one single reason, and that is she is not rich like Emma. While Emma is an heiress who will be at the center of society even if she remains single, Jane Fairfax, despite her equal talents, must depend on a good marriage. This also relates to the theme of social uplift through marriage. A woman in Jane Austen's times would look for a match, would look for a man who would add to her status. If she remains single, she will be forced into a degrading life as a spinster, resembling the fate of her aunt Miss Bates. The comparison between the governess trade and the slave trading highlights this injustice. Well, another important thing with reference to this chapter that would further unfold in the upcoming chapters is Frank Churchill's announced arrival and its implications that are very, very important with reference to the characters of Emma, Mr. Knightley and Jane Fairfax. This takes us to chapter 36. Mr. Weston and Mrs. Elton have a detailed conversation in which they talk about a lot of things in a light manner. Mrs. Elton is more keen to have compliments. She says a lot about Maple Grove, the estate where her wealthy brother and sister-in-law live. Mr. Weston, on the other hand, talks about Frank Churchill and explains the illness of Frank's aunt, Mrs. Churchill. Conversation reveals a lot about the Churchill family. They are proud people. Frank Churchill's pride, however, is harmless. On the other hand, the pride of his aunt manifests as arrogance and insolence even though she has no great familial connections. Mr. John Knightley leaves his son, Henry, and John to stay with Emma, but he worries that they will be a burden on her considering her increasing social life. He thinks that Emma has been more social in the past 6 months and spends time with more different people. Mr. George Knightley suggests that the children can stay with him. On this, Emma reminds him that he has as many social functions as she does, for they attend the same ones, and that is, she is never absent from her estate. She rejects John Knightley's implication and insists that she spends more time at home than Mr. George Knightley, who seems pleased and amused by the assertion. Well, the argument between Mr. George Knightley and Emma, and on the other hand between Mr. John Knightley and Emma, is very, very significant, as now John Knightley is leaving his both the sons, Henry and John, with Emma to spend a few days. He thinks that it would be a burden for Emma because, according to him, Emma is becoming more social and she's spending more time outside her estate. At which, when George Knightley says that children can stay with him, Emma is very, very much irritated by this, and she tries to counter argue by saying that she attends the same functions as does he, so he is also equally busy. And at the end, she also makes a claim that she spends most of her time at her home and at her estate. Well, the reaction of Mr. George Knightley is again very significant, because what we find is that he is enjoying all this irritation on the part of Emma. Well, dear students, here is some text from chapter 36 that I think would be of interest for you, though I am sure you would read the whole text of the novel yourselves, but some parts I always select so that we could share in the session and we could have more critical insights. So this is an extract selected from chapter 36. Mr. Weston was musing. "I hope," said he presently, "I have not been severe upon poor Mrs. Churchill. If she is ill, I should be sorry to do her injustice, but there are some traits in her character which make it difficult for me to speak of her with the forbearance I could wish. You cannot be arrogant, Mrs. Elton, of my connection with the family, nor of the treatment I have met him with, and between ourselves the whole blame of it is to be laid to her. She was the instigator. Frank's mother would have never been slighted as she was but for her. Mr. Churchill has pride, but his pride is nothing to his wife's. He is a quiet, indolent, gentleman-like sort of pride that would harm nobody and only make himself a little helpless and tiresome. But her pride is arrogance and insolence, and what inclines one less to bear, she has no fair pretense of family or blood. She was nobody when he married her, barely the daughter of a gentleman, but ever since her being turned into a Churchill, she has out-Churchilled them all in high and mighty claims. But in herself, I assure you, she is an upstart. Only think, well, that must be infinitely provoking. I have quite a horror of upstarts. Maple Grove has given me a thorough disgust to people of that sort, for there is a family in that neighborhood who are such an annoyance to my brother and my sister from the airs they give themselves. Your description of Mrs. Churchill made me think of them directly. People of the name of Tupman very lately settled there and encumbered with many low connections, but giving themselves immense airs, expecting to be on a footing with the old established families. A year and a half is the very utmost that they can have lived at West Hall, and how they got their fortune nobody knows. They came from Birmingham, which is not a place to promise much, you know, Mr. Weston. One has not great hopes from Birmingham. So what we notice is that as Mr. Weston talks about Mrs. Churchill and gives comments about the aunt of Frank Churchill, that is Mrs. Churchill, that she has arrogance and snobbery in her personality, and she actually is only because of the fact that she is a member of the Churchill family after marriage that her status has raised. But she is very snobbish in talking about her status. To add to all this, what we notice is that new Mrs. Elton says a lot. She keeps on giving examples of her own brother and sister who are very much annoyed by some family in the neighborhood, and she talks a lot about people who are not well established and who have fortune or money that nobody knows where it comes from, etc. The purpose of all this discussion, as far as the writer is concerned, is to present a picture of the England of those times. These were the times जब आप जिसको कहते हैं ना कि जद्दी पुश्ती अमीर होना, ख़ानदानी होना was more important for the people of Jane Austen's times, and that is reflected in the novel Emma throughout. So even people who would have money, who would have earned it some ways, they would not be considered equal to the genuine elite of the times. Anyhow, the text continues. I always say there is something direful in the sound, but nothing more is positively known of the Tupmans, though a good many things I assure you are suspected, and yet by their manners they evidently think themselves equal even to my brother, Mr. Suckling, who happens to be one of their nearest neighbours. It is infinitely too bad. Mr. Suckling, who has been 11 years a resident at Maple Grove, and whose father had it before him, I believe, at least I am almost sure that old Mr. Suckling had completed the purchase before his death. They were interrupted. Tea was carrying round, and Mr. Weston, having said all that he wanted, soon took the opportunity of walking away. After tea, Mr. and Mrs. Weston and Mr. Elton sat down with Mr. Woodhouse to cards. The remaining 5 were left to their own powers, and Emma doubted their getting on very well, for Mr. Knightley seemed little disposed for conversation. Mrs. Elton's was wanting notice, which nobody had inclination to pay, and she was herself in a hurry of spirits which would have made her prefer being silent. Mr. John Knightley proved more talkative than his brother. He was to leave them early the next day, and he soon began with, "Well, Emma, I don't believe I have anything more to say about the boys, but you have your sister's letter, and everything is down at full length there, we may be sure. My charge would be much more concise than hers, and probably not much in the same spirit. All that I have to recommend being comprised in, do not spoil them, and do not physique them. I rather hope to satisfy you both," said Emma, "for I shall do all in my power to make them happy, which will be enough for Isabella, and happiness must preclude false indulgence and physic." So what we notice is that John Knightley is worried about his sons as he's giving them in the custody of Emma for a few days, but Emma assures that she would take care of them. As if you find them troublesome, you might send them home again. That is very likely. You think so, don't you? I hope I'm aware that they may be too noisy for your father, or even maybe some encumbrance to you if your visiting engagements continue to increase as much as they have done lately. Increase? Certainly, you must be sensible that the last half year has made a great difference in your way of life. अब आर्ग्यूमेंट शुरू हो जाता है एमा में और जॉन नाइटली में, बिकॉज ही सेज कि अगर तुम इनसे तंग पड़ जाओ तो बच्चों को मेरे पास वापस भिजवा देना क्योंकि यू आर बिजी, your social engagements have increased. On which Emma gets annoyed and she says that it is not so. Difference? No, indeed I am not. There can be no doubt of your being much more engaged with company than you used to be. Witness this very time. Here am I, come down for only one day, and you are engaged with a dinner party. When did it happen before or anything like it? Your neighborhood is increasing and you mix more with it. A little while ago, every letter to Isabella brought an account of fresh gaieties, dinners at Mr. Cole's or balls at the Crown. The difference which Randall's alone makes in your goings-on is very great. Yes, said his brother quickly. It is Randall's that does it all. Very well, and as Randall's, I suppose, is not likely to have less influence than heretofore, it strikes me as a possible thing, Emma, that Henry and John may be sometimes in the way. And if they are, I only beg you to send them home. No, cried Mr. Knightley, that need not to be the consequence. Let them be sent to Donwell. So this is the place where Mr. Knightley lives. वो कहता है कि मेरे पास भिजवा देना. I shall certainly be at Layer. Upon my word, exclaimed Emma, you amuse me. I should like to know how many of all my numerous engagements take place without you being of the party, and why I am to be supposed in danger of wanting Layer to attend to the little boys. अब एमा उससे लड़ना शुरू हो जाती है कि जितनी पार्टीज मैं अटेंड करती हूँ तुम भी तो उतनी करते हो. These amazing engagements of mine, what have they been? Dining once with the Coles and having a ball talked of, which never took place? I can understand you, nodding at Mr. John Knightley. Your good fortune in meeting with so many of your friends at once here delights you too much to pass unnoticed. But you, turning to Mr. Knightley, who know how very seldom I am ever 2 hours from Harfield, why you should foresee such a series of dissipation from me, I cannot imagine. And as to my dear little boys, I must say that if Aunt Emma has no time for them, I don't think they would fare much better with Uncle Knightley, who is absent from home about 5 hours, where she is absent 1, and who, when he is at home, is either reading to himself or settling his accounts. Mr. Knightley seemed to be trying not to smile, and succeeded without difficulty upon Mrs. Elton's beginning to talk to him. And actually this is the point where the chapter and the volume both come to an end. Here is a quick discussion on important critical points that are with reference to Jane Austen as a writer, how she uses different voices. So far what we have noticed is that Jane Austen has used George Knightley and John Knightley to serve as the voices to say that is not or cannot be said properly otherwise. Now what we notice is that Mrs. Elton serves as the voice for questions that normally would be too rude to ask. Through her persistent questioning about Frank Churchill, we learn more about the ill feelings that Mr. Weston has toward the Churchill family. Mr. John Knightley indicates that Emma cares too much for social functions and entertainment. As he claims that her social activity takes precedence over her family commitments, we notice that this hurts Emma and wounds her pride. That is why we also see her counter-arguing. Mr. Knightley made a similar criticism about Frank Churchill as well, which foreshadows his later concerns about Frank Churchill's influence over Emma. Another important discussion point with relation to chapters 34 to 36 is the use of dinner party as a tool to explore the psychology of characters. Austen has used 3 chapters to narrate a single dinner party. This is not without purpose. She uses this narration as an opportunity to trace extensively different aspects of human psychology. Also, in doing so, she provides a model for later writers to explore and present human behavior and psychology in their writings. During the dinner party, we come to know about Jane Fairfax, who begins to come out of her reserved shell and speaks more. In fact, Jane is the character who voices the novel's most explicit social protest, which seems to come directly from Austen herself. Jane speaks against the governess trade, which involves the sale not quite of human flesh but of human intellect. She admits that offices that advertise for governess positions are less morally deplorable than slave traders, but she adds, "But as to the greater misery of the victims, I do not know where it lies." It is the theme of pretensions that also emerges through these chapters. During the dinner party, we find many characters involved in forced social dialogue, which is meaningless and absurd, because at the same time a social need of their status and position. For example, we find Mrs. Elton and Mr. Weston involved in conversations that are just for the sake of nothing, that are ridiculous, and that have discontinuous shifts of topics. We find that Mrs. Elton continuously turns the conversation to the topic of herself and her wealthy relations. On the other hand, Mr. Weston every time brings the conversation back to his sons, even to the extent that once he jumps in the conversation at an interval caused by a coughing fit of Mrs. Elton. We have already seen that Mrs. Weston is always fishing compliments, which shows her superficial nature. With this, we come to the end. Here is the list of the references and materials used, but before I close, I would like to share a quick review of today's session. Well, in today's session, we continued volume 2 of the novel Emma. In other words, we covered from chapter 29 to chapter 36, and for this purpose, we followed the same scheme of analysis, which meant from chapter to chapter, we looked at how themes are developed and how important parts of text are related to these themes. We also looked at the development of different characters with reference to the critical points of analysis raised from these chapters. With this, I come to the end of today's session. Thank you very much.